Hey everyone, this is the Rewriter writing in. For today's video, I want to start a new series on this channel that I'm entitling Rewriter's Blueprints. In this series, I'll be discussing projects that are in development or rumored to be in development and talk about what I'd like to see in them. Think of this as kind of my ideal version of the game or movie in discussion. However, I won't be writing a full story for these videos as these are just meant to list out my overall thoughts on a particular subject. So the subject for this video is on the open world Star Wars game that Ubisoft is developing. Now EA is not showing off any Star Wars games this year, which is a major disappointment, but then again, this is EA we're talking about here, so I figured that now would be as good of time as any to put out my thoughts and hopes for this open world Star Wars game. I'm a little skeptical of this new game as this is Ubisoft after all, and they've run a few of their great IPs into the ground. I'm looking at you, Assassin's Creed. I'm not going to sit here and say that they should or will implement all my ideas into their new game, because that's just not realistic, but I thought it would be fun to share my ideas with you all. So with this long-winded introduction out of the way, let's dive into my ideal open world Star Wars game. Let's start with the overall type of game. Now, obviously this is open world, but what I mean is the general type of game that we'll be playing. Because you can play an open world horror game, simulation game, puzzle game, etc. For this particular game, which is not going to be a surprise, I feel that it should be and will be an action-adventure game with a heavy emphasis on story and with the option of playing in first or third person if you want to. I really like this idea that Bethesda games do, where they allow you to play the entire game in first or third person. It's just that additional layer of customization that I've always appreciated. However, the third person would have to be a lot better optimized, as playing it is pretty janky in Bethesda games. The most ideal implementation of this would be to have the third person play and function like Uncharted or Star Wars 1313, and the first person can function like the cancelled Prey 2 game. Both of the movement systems in these games were fluid and responsive, and combat looked very satisfying and fun to play. For me, the ideal type of gameplay would be parkour movement, which is being able to climb over walls, vault over barriers, duck and roll in and out of combat, just being very mobile. And then for combat, I'd love the gunplay to feel like 1313, with targeting specific body parts causing the enemy to stumble or limp. And for the melee combat, something akin to the Batman Arkham games would be awesome. Now, I know that this is a lot of different gameplay systems in one game, but I feel that making sure each aspect of the gameplay is solid and well built is key for a game like this. Now, the next point that I have here is the atmosphere and tone of the game. I kind of already ruined the answer to this in my previous point, but I guess I'm just going to have to repeat myself. This game is going to be rated T, so there's no room for any super hardcore themes or events, and plus this is Star Wars, so I wouldn't want it to be rated M anyway. However, I would want this game to have a bit of a darker tone because of what kind of game I want it to be, which I'll explain in a little bit. Therefore, I would love the atmosphere to feel like Star Wars 1313, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, and Prey 2. A bit darker and rougher than your typical Star Wars movie, but still carrying the same spirit of one. I wouldn't want this game to not feel like Star Wars, I just don't think it has to feel exactly like the movies do. I think this tone would work well as 1313 was highly anticipated and people were really disappointed when it got cancelled. So to have a Star Wars project that somewhat harkens back to this would be a welcome addition in many fans' eyes. Let's now talk about the time period that this game should take place in. For me, I think the time period of the Old Republic would work perfectly here, as all of the factions are still in existence and there's no major power like Sidious's empire being over everything. Now, I know that there are a few games in this time already, like KOTOR 1 and 2, as well as SWTOR, but this time and setting is rich for storytelling and characters, as there are thousands of years of history and lore just waiting to be unveiled and shown to the player. As well, you aren't shackled to keeping things lore-friendly by putting it in the same time period as any of the three trilogies. Next, I want to discuss where I'd like the setting to be, and what role the player's character would have. I would love if this game were a bounty hunter focused adventure set on the planet of Coruscant as the main world that you explore. This setting works so perfectly for a bounty hunter game, as it's a futuristic metropolis with tons of buildings, people, and vehicles populating the streets and skies. This setting would allow for so many unique traversal options, from flying around in a hover car, to a speeder, to your own cruiser, to even flying around with your jetpack or rocket boots. Additionally, there are many gangs and criminal organizations that work deep under the surface of Coruscant, and where your guild would have its base of operations. It would be so cool to see multiple factions interacting with each other throughout the world, whether it's through hostile firefights or arms dealing, or whatever scenario. Plus, there's so much diversity of races, factions, guilds, etc. that makes Coruscant an exciting location for bounty hunting. There are no shortage of targets in a metropolis like this. So I'd like Coruscant to be the main world that the player will explore and do most of the main story in, but I'd also like to be able to travel to other planets and do some contracts in these locations. Now, it's unrealistic to say that they should make multiple open worlds on multiple different planets, because not only is this a tremendous amount of work, but also if they make multiple open worlds, then none of them will be all that detailed and fleshed out, because it's just too much work on the part of the devs, and I wouldn't want them to have to go through a major crunch for a feature that most people wouldn't want. I'd much rather have one massive, fully explorable and intricately detailed open world map, and a few smaller, more linear maps akin to what we got in Jedi Fallen Order, than 4 or 5 huge open worlds that are bland and uninteresting. Now, some planets that I think could be cool to explore in this linear fashion are Nar Shaddaa, Kashyyyk, Naboo, Bespin, and Mandalore. Next, let's talk about gameplay elements that I would love to see in a game like this. For me, I'd love it if this game were an RPG action-adventure title. Now, there are many red flags that can be instantly thrown up when we think of a modern RPG, but just hear me out. For one, I wouldn't have any microtransactions, cosmetic only or not, as these completely derail all the fun of a game like this. Unfortunately, I don't foresee this game not having microtransactions, as this is the nature of game development these days and publishers are extremely greedy. But I'd love it if there weren't any. Next, I wouldn't have levels and level gating, such as, you're level 3 now, so you can go to this place that you haven't been before because all the enemies were invincible because you weren't the right level. I hate this feature of new RPGs, as it feels like such a cheap way to get people to grind ridiculously long hours, or pay for these quote-unquote time savers as they call them. The fact that they have the audacity to call them time savers is such a slap in the face to their audience, and treats it like this is a job that they had to get through this game, instead of hours of enjoyment and fun that a video game should provide. So levels and level gating would not be a thing in my version of this game. Now, in terms of locations on the map, I would still want some areas of it to not be as accessible to someone who just started the game. I would want there to be many surprises throughout the story of areas and characters that will show up later, so I wouldn't want these spoiled for the player. However, like I said before, there would be no level gating or invincible enemies, as this really isn't fun for anyone playing through it. So I would situate it where the player can go to these areas, but more elite bounty hunters and crime lords will hunt you down and make short work of you while you are still low on gadgets and weapons. However, if you are skilled enough, you can take down one of these legendary bounty hunters from the start, but it would be incredibly difficult. Not because they're invincible, but their armor and weapons are vastly superior to yours. This way, it doesn't feel like a cheap cop-out because you are legitimately under-equipped and not experienced enough to take on the powerful characters yet. Now, I keep bringing up invincibility because in games like Assassin's Creed and Destiny, the enemies are legitimately invincible if you aren't the right level. I really don't understand why the enemies have to be like this. There are way more other ways to do essentially the same thing that doesn't make the experience feel cheap. So let's talk about gear for a moment. Every good RPG has a rewarding gear system that is simple, yet can allow for a few different styles of play. Gear in this game would work similarly, where you start off with gear that still looks pretty cool, but is not legendary like Mandalorian Beskar armor. I always hated in other RPGs where your starting and low level armor looks like complete trash, so I wouldn't want that in this game. You have to work up the ranks of the guild to get higher paying contracts that will allow you to get the more expensive armors. For weapons, the player will start out with typical blaster pistols, rifles, snipers, and work their way up to getting more exotic and famous weapons. The common and rare weapons and armor have varying degrees of price, with many of them being purchasable in black markets with the credits that you earn from bounty targets, again with in-game currency and not with microtransactions. For gadgets, I would like if most of these were tied to the main and side quests, as it would feel rewarding to get new ones by progressing through the story, with some of them giving a big advantage to the player, like being able to take down an entire group with whistling birds. I'd love if most, if not all, the legendary armor and weapons are achieved by the player through the story by doing tough side quests and taking down important bosses. In addition to all this, it would be so cool to see all kinds of weapons and armors in the game, ranging from those found in Star Wars already to multiple sets and weapons created originally by the team at Ubisoft. It would be so awesome to see some really unique sets that you might not find in other Star Wars games. Now, in terms of builds and stats, I would have all weapons and armor have inherent base stats that can be upgraded and built upon, as well as transmogged to other armor that you prefer more, letting the player hang on to what they love without forcing them to change their look or loadout. Every weapon and every armor is viable from the time you pick it up until the end of the game, so there's no being forced to swap out things due to BS requirements from the game. Additionally, every weapon and armor in this game would be unique, meaning that you wouldn't have two sets that look exactly the same but are called different things and have different stats. This is a lazy way to bloat the loot pool, making players think that there's more armor than there is, and this also of course applies to weapons. Also, no weapons or armors are locked behind player levels because there wouldn't be any, but would be unavailable due to low funds or if the player hasn't completed the specific quest associated with it. With the starting stats that are on the weapons and armor you choose, you will be able to tailor your playstyle to either be more guns blazing, stealthy, gadget oriented, more mobile, more tanky, whatever you want to do. You can focus on using only pistols, only snipers, maybe a mix of pistol and vibroblade, melee only, heavy weapons only, or a healthy mix of all. Gadgets would be anything from whistling birds to night vision or thermal vision, to wrist rockets, to the wrist flamethrower, to the wire, to the knee blasters that Boba had in Mandalorian, to the gravity bombs like in Prey 2, just about anything. It would be amazing to just let the player completely immerse themselves in their character and play any way they want without restrictions. And just a side note, I would also prefer if the game didn't have health bars or visible damage numbers like many RPGs do now, as this breaks the immersion for me. The only time I don't mind a health bar on an enemy is when there's a boss fight, but that's about it for me. So let's now talk about the player character in this game. Instead of being locked to playing a human like many RPGs, in this game, the player can choose to play as a human if they want, but they're not limited to that. They can choose to play as a Wookiee, Ewok, Zabrak, Chiss, Bothon, Twi'lek, Gungan, Trandoshan, and many more. Letting the player choose their race would be so much fun, and in addition to this, it would also be really cool to have each race have a character trait that is unique to them. This would give the player incentive to go back and try multiple characters out. In this main character screen, you will also be able to pick your starting stats, allowing the player to lean into their preferred build right from the start. You will be able to tweak all the features that you can in other RPGs like Mass Effect and Elder Scrolls, from important things like body type to really unimportant things like where your nose is placed. All these features allow the player to craft their perfect character as the game progresses. Now, another feature that I want to talk about is choosing and customizing your ship and preferred method of travel. Because the player wouldn't be traveling off-world in the beginning, or even early on in the story, I would make buying a ship be on the more expensive side, and you have to save up from multiple contracts to be able to afford one. If you wanted to buy one as quick as possible, you could buy one with very little armor and no weapons. From here you can upgrade your ship, making it extremely fast, durable, and powerful. Or you can save for a while and get a ship that already has great stats. You will have a large range of ships to choose from, and each have their own unique traits that make them desirable for different reasons. And we can't talk about ships without talking about space combat, which would be a feature in this game. You have the possibility of being raided by other guilds, pirates, or crime boss henchmen that are after you. I would absolutely love it if the transition from land to boarding your ship and flying into space was seamless with no loading screens. With the power of SSDs that are in the new consoles, as well as on PC, they should be able to accomplish this with ease. Space battles should be a fun challenge that tests the player's ability as a pilot and warrior, and would be perfect for a game like this. Let's now talk about some of the other factions and guilds that could be present in this game. Because we are in the Old Republic, both the Jedi and the Sith are around. I would have maybe a few interactions with Force wielders, but for the most part, I'd rather be fighting other bounty hunting guilds, criminal organizations, Republic police forces, pirates, etc. This is because I wouldn't want the main character to be a Force wielder in any way, as we have plenty of Star Wars games where you play as a Sith or Jedi, and I'd want these fights to be sparing, only used as a few tough boss fights. A few of the major bounty hunting guilds that I think would be cool to interact with would be Crimson Nova, who specialize in Jedi hunting, House Benelex, who specialize in kidnapping retrieval, House Paramexor, who specialize in hunting murderers, House Tresario, who specialize in hunting pirates, Skyne Bounty Hunter College, who are just top specialists in most fields, Slaver Syndicate, who sometimes turn their bounties over to slavers, Black Sun Assassins, and a few Mandalorian houses, those being House Vizsla and House Fett. And then for the pirate factions, a few of those can be the Migrant Merchants Guild, Justicars, Kintan Kings, and Howling Tempest. All of these guilds would have interactions with the player, where they can take a variety of quests, from retrieving kidnapped people to hunting down murderers, to taking down Jedi or Sith. Something that could also be cool is if you are able to begin allying yourself with the guilds that you agree with. This would allow you to develop your character, giving them their own motivations and desires as the story progresses. Let's now talk about the most important aspect of this game, especially for me, the story. Now, I don't have a full story written for this game, but I have an idea of where I'd want this story to go. I definitely would want this game to feel like a zero to hero story, where you start in a very low place and position and become one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy. One thing that I definitely don't want with this game is to be the quote-unquote chosen one of sorts, as this trend is cliche and overused. I would have the character make a name for themselves by their actions and decisions. As far as the story is concerned, my idea is just one of many possible stories that this game could go with. So I'd like the character to have an origin similar to Din Djarin's, where they are ripped from their family and put into one of these bounty hunting guilds as a foundling. From here, the player learns how to become a bounty hunter with cool and unique training tutorials that make learning the basics fun. Something that could be cool is how Titanfall 2 had this movement tutorial called Gauntlet that people to this day still try to get the best time record for, or how COD Modern Warfare has the F&G tutorial that people still also try to get records for. Something like this would be fun to see people try to get records for, and would boost this game's popularity on launch. As far as the main thrust of the game is concerned, I think it could be cool if there was some forbidden, long-lost object of power that many of the different guilds have been contracted to retrieve and bring back to this shadow entity for the largest sum of credits ever offered for a job. From here, the player would have to deal with rival bounty hunters interfering with their progress, with pirates who also want the loot. Maybe when they find this object of power, it's revealed to be an ancient Sith battle harness that, once worn by the main villain, makes them possessed with the spirits of many Sith lords. Understanding that this is too much power for one individual, possibly that being the person who killed or had the main character's family killed for a reason, they now have to take him down before he destroys them. I know that this story is not fleshed out in the slightest, and there are tons of story ideas that they could go with, but this is just one that came to my mind. Additionally, I think that it would be really cool to have the main character gain prestige in the guild, slowly building more influence as the story goes on. This influence would lead to them building the guild with characters that they trust, or distrust to a degree, but need their expertise. Having relationships with members of the guild makes the people that you interact with more relatable and real to a certain degree, and it's fun interacting with many different personalities. The side quests can also be unique, with follower quests along with the bounty contracts similar to Witcher contracts in Witcher 3. I use this comparison because in Witcher 3, you have to analyze a crime scene, study up on the monster that you are about to kill, and attack it either in its hideout or by baiting it out somewhere. This idea is more unique and engaging than if a townsperson just walked up to Geralt and told him to kill that monster that was just standing over there. In a similar vein, each contract that you took in this Star Wars game would be a unique character with their own motivations. It would take time to study them, isolate them, and finally take them down. Each of these side contracts would take a couple hours at least, as you have to gain lots of intel, take down their defenses, and gain the upper hand on them. When you finally get to the last phase of the contract, these missions could play out like levels in Hitman, where you must use all aspects of the environment to cleanly take down your target with the least amount of heat on you. However, if you are spotted, the mission doesn't end, as you must fight to get out of there alive, while also taking down the target. I feel that these contracts would be a blast to play through. But when the story concludes, that's where the real creativity comes into play. When control of the guild is now given to the player, they have a couple of options on what they want to do with it. Will they use the guild to manipulate and control people, taking contracts against those society would deem innocent or morally good people? Will they make deals with other crime lords to keep the illegal arms and death sticks flowing through the grimy streets of Coruscant? Will the guild's sole purpose be lining its denizens' pockets? Are the inhabitants of the guild scum and criminals alike? Or will they use the guild to fight back against the evil crime lords and other factions that manipulate people? Will they steal from the rich and give to the poor? Will the guild become more of a home or shelter to those who need it? The choice is yours on how you want to run the guild, and here is where you can make many impactful decisions that will decide how those who are already in the guild perceive you. If many members of the guild are morally good people, by turning the guild into a crime organization, there could be a mutiny on your hands. And vice versa, if there are evil members of the guild and you turn it around for good, they will rebel against you, or even form their own rival factions. Additionally, at this point in the game, you can switch it from PvE to PvP. In the PvP scenario, other players with their guilds can choose to attack or ally themselves with your guild. Your main purpose in PvP is to try and control as much territory as possible, while fighting off rival guilds and NPC factions that will attack you. You can recruit members from other guilds to join yours, and can ally with another guild who is being attacked. You can also trade weapons, gadgets, and armor to other players in exchange for what they have. As well, you can start new guilds in other parts of Coruscant aside from your original one. This concept would be similar to what Middle-earth Shadow of War did, but it would be a bit more fleshed out. I believe that this style of multiplayer would be so much more unique and interesting than typical arena shooters, as it would play to the strengths of the game itself. There can be other game modes as well, like a dedicated space battles or team deathmatch playlist, but the one I just described would be the highlighted multiplayer mode. In all, I know that there's no way that Ubisoft would follow this formula exactly. This video is made purely for fun, as I just wanted to share my thoughts on how an open world Star Wars game could be made, and not as some message that Ubisoft has to do this or the game will fail. But if they incorporated even a quarter of what I have listed here, then this game would be on the right track to being really successful, at least in my eyes. However, I don't feel that this is very likely, and feel that we'll get an Assassin's Creed or Watch Dogs game reskinned into Star Wars. While I'm not very hopeful for this game right now, I'd love to be proven completely wrong, and shown an epic looking Star Wars game that is worthy of being a part of this franchise. We've had way too little Star Wars games over the past decade of EA's control, and I can't wait until this dirty publisher relinquishes its grasp on a franchise that we all love, and other companies like Ubisoft can take a stab at bringing a great game to this beloved franchise. So that's where I'll be ending the video. Thank you all so much for watching. What do you think of my open world Star Wars game? What would your version of this game look like? Let me know all of this in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, then leave a like. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, then subscribe to the channel. Thanks again everyone, and this is the Rewriter, writing out.